In today's tutorial, we're going to take a stitch expedition into Cobnut Stitch, or sometimes called Hazelnut Stitch. Hi, if you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm Donna Jones, and today's tutorial we're going to be having a stitch expedition. We're going to have a thorough deep dive into Cobnut Stitch, or Hazelnut Stitch as it's sometimes called, and it's a beautiful textured stitch that is very, I think, evocative of the natural world as well. And some of you who know me know I get a lot of inspiration from nature. So I'm gonna show you the stitch, but if you hang around, after that we'll have a look at the implications for whether you're knitting in the round or whether you're knitting it flat, and also what other creative thoughts or ideas we might have on how to use this beautiful stitch. Okay, let's crack on then. So firstly, what is Cobnut Stitch? Well, it's a lovely textured stitch that works on a reverse stocking stitch background, but then you have these little cobnuts. They look like little hazelnuts, little cobnuts, that's hence the name. Okay, so where we've got some increases and decreases that make those, it's not quite a bobble, but it kind of has that sort of flattened bobble effect. It's not a reversible fabric. However, I would say I don't think it looks particularly unattractive on the reverse side either. Obviously, you've not got the little cobnuts. It's great for things like cows, even scarves to some extent, where you're going to end up seeing the reverse side. It's a fairly small scale pattern repeat. It's only 4 stitches, so that's really helpful for if you're needing to do, you know, different sizes. It makes it a very versatile pattern. As you can see, the cobnuts are worked in rows, and they're staggered basically. So you have a cobnut and then a couple of rows, and then you've got them staggered. But we'll get to seeing how that's actually done now. So let's start with knitting in rows. I've cast on 23 stitches, so that's multiples of 4 plus 3. And the reason for that is it's just going to place it nicely in the middle for us. It's reverse stocking stitch, so I've done 2 rows of that. So on the right side row, that was purl, and then I knit a row. And I'm about to do my first cobnut row. First, I'm going to purl 3. So that's purl 1, 2, 3. And then the 4th stitch, we're going to be making the cobnut. And we do that by increasing into that same stitch. So we actually knit, and then we make a yarn over. And I'm knitting English style, so that means I bring the yarn forward, okay? And then I'm going to knit back into that same stitch. So now we've got 3 stitches from that 1 stitch, okay? So then we're going to bring the yarn back to start purling again, and we're going to purl 3 again. 1, 2, 3. Okay, yarn to the back because we're going to knit. We're going to knit, yarn over, and knit into that stitch. Knit, bring the yarn forward, knit, and just check you got 3 stitches coming out of that one, which we have. Okay, and it's the same again. You just rinse and repeat. Okay, so it's purl 3, okay, and then we're going to go to knit, yarn over, and knit in this stitch to make the cobnut. Knit, yarn forward, knit, and we carry on across the row. Next one, it's rinse and repeat. Okay, so that's our first row, and obviously the number of stitches will have increased a fair bit because you're getting, with each cobnut that you've introduced there, you've got 2 additional stitches. Okay, don't worry, it goes back down again after. So row 2 then, essentially you're going to just be maintaining the pattern. So we're going to do knit every knit stitch, that we presented with. When someone says knit every knit stitch, that's what they mean. Okay, so from this side, that's a knit stitch. You can tell it's got a V. Okay, and then you can see the little bundles of 3 stitches for your cobnut, and we're going to purl across the 3 stitches of the cobnuts. Okay, so knit 3, and then you can see, oh yeah, there's one of those funny cobnuts. I'm going to purl those 3. Okay, and then you're going to knit 3, and you're going to purl 3. Oops. Okay, and you're going to do that across the row. So, and it's easy to see, you're knitting the knits, yeah, and you're purling your cobnuts. Okay, so you can start to see these cobnuts are starting to grow. Yeah, row 3 then is we're just kind of working it straight out again, this whereby we're not adjusting any stitches. We're going to purl 3, because you're going to purl the purls. You can see a purl because it's got the purl bump there, and we're going to knit across the bumps, knit across the cobnuts this time. Okay, so purl 3, knit across the cobnut, then we're back to purling. You can see the purl bump. Carrying across the row, purl 3, knit 3. Okay, so on row 1 we made the cobnuts by doing that increase row with the yarn overs. We've done 2 rows kind of straight, as it were, in this sort of ribby type pattern, and then on the 4th row we're going to decrease those cobnuts back down to make them. So on this row we're going to be knitting the knit stitches. The purl stitches are what is the cobnut. Okay, and we need to decrease those back to 1. So knit 3, and then we're going to purl these 3 together. Okay, it's a bit fiddly till you get used to it, but I find if I just pinch the fabric with my thumb and forefinger slightly, just pulls that down a little bit, it's easy to get the needle in. Okay, and I'm purling those 3 together, and that's gathering my cobnut back up. So then we're going to purl the 3 stitches to the next cobnut. Okay, and we're going to purl those 3 stitches together, and let's rinse and repeat. Knit 3, okay, purl 3 together. Okay, so on the last one there, purl those badgers together. So we've just done row 4, where we purled 3 together to close up those cobnuts. Now need to do a couple of rows of reverse stocking stitch before we can do the next set. So rows 5 and 6 are going to be, row 5 is purl because we've got right side facing, and row 6 is going to be knit, and then we're halfway through the 12 row repeat. Okay, so it's 4 stitches repeats and it's 12 rows. That's row 5, row 6, we're going to knit across all the stitches, Okay, so we've now done 2 rows reverse stocking stitch. We're going to start working our cob nuts again, but what we're doing is we're staggering it. So we've got 3 stitches between each cob nut, so it's that middle stitch of the 3 that we'll actually be working. So we're going to purl 1, and we're going to do our knit 1, yarn forward, knit 1 there. Okay, and then we're going to purl 3, and that second stitch, your cob nut previously, should be just underneath it. Okay, 2, 3. That's how you can check you're in the right place, as if you're anything like me. One slight lapse of concentration and they're all out of kilter. Okay, so you do your 1, purl 3, 1. I'll just check in again, that's over my cob nut, 2, 3, and away you go really. Cob nut 1, and then you're purling 3, 1, 2, 3. That's the last one there, and we purl 1 to finish. Okay, so our next row then, row 2, is really the same as row 8 is the same as row 2 really. So in that we're going to be knitting over the knits and we're purling over the cob nuts, the cob nut little bundle of 3 stitches. So the first stitch now is a knit. Okay, we're going to purl across those 3 cob nut stitch, cob nuts, knit 3, you can see that's the cob nut there, purl 3, okay, we're gonna knit 3, cob nut, purl those ones, all across the row. Okay, so that was row 1. We can see our cob nuts have now appeared. So for our next row we're going to knit the cob nut stitches and purl the background stitches. Okay, so we're starting with purl 1, and then we're going to knit those and purl 3. This is a nice, easy to remember stitch repeat. The action's only really happening on row 1, and you've got 4 rows where something's happening and the rest is kind of just knitting the knits and purling the purls, as they say. That was row 9. We've started our cob nut, we've got 2 rows of it going straight. So on the wrong side row we're again going to be decreasing those cob nuts down by purling 3 together. Okay, we are going to knit 1, purl those 3 together, okay, knit 3, purl 3 together. So we're closing up all those cob nuts as we go. Knit 3, purl 3 together, knit 3, purl 3 together, knit 1. So that was row 10. Rows 11 and 12, it's going to be the reverse stocking stitch. So I'm going to purl the next row, and then I'm going to turn and I'm going to knit the following row, and that completes our 12 row pattern repeat. Okay, so row 12 is going to be a knit row across all the stitches. Okay, so when you're working in the round, the right side of the work is always facing you because you don't turn back at any point. Okay, so what that means is the reverse stocking stitch means always purling to get the reverse stocking stitch, and the cob nuts are worked entirely with knit stitches. So that means you would purl 3, work your yarn over increase into the 4th stitch, purl 3, etc. across the round. Then the second round you would do purl 3, knit 3, purl 3, knit 3. Okay, all the way around, and you'd repeat that round, be the same, because you've got your increase row, you've got 2 sort of straight rows. Okay, and then row 4 you would decrease, but you're doing this on the right side this time, so you would purl 3, you would knit those 3 together, purl 3, etc. Okay, and then purl 2 rounds in between the cob nuts. The other things to consider about working in the round versus working flat is it will influence the number of stitches that you need. Okay. Another thing to consider is the placement of your cob stitch pattern and what you're using it for, because that's going to inform the number of additional stitches you need to make it work. And what I mean by that is, we said before, the Cobnut stitch is a multiple of 4. Yeah, it's purl 3, make a Cobnut, and repeat. So just to try and show that diagrammatically, we're going to do 3 purls and a Cobnut, 3 purls and a Cobnut. Okay. If we are placing this centrally, we want it to look nice and symmetrical. So that's just not going to work if we just stop at multiple of 3. What we need to do in that case is add 3 stitches. Okay, multiple of 4 plus 3. And how that would look on the next Cobnut staggered is 1, 2, 3, Cobnut. And I know the knitting stitch has got reverse stocking stitch in between, hasn't it? But this is just to show it what we mean diagrammatically. Okay, and that's how it would look. Okay, and it would be nice and centrally placed and symmetrical. But if you wanted to knit in the flat and join your project, like with these mitts, where the seam is, you're going to want a seamless join. Okay, and that's where these are seamed. Yeah, so hopefully done a good job there in doing a seamless join. To achieve that, it's about allowing 2 stitches to kind of disappear into that seam, but still keep the pattern. And if you're knitting a sweater, etc., you know, anywhere where you're joining the 2 pieces and it's got to be seamless, then you need to add 2 stitches. It's a multiple of 4 plus 2, and I'll show you how that works. Okay, so we'll just do our dummy repeats. We're going to add 2. Oh, I'm not doing that again. So, and how that works then, so if you've got a seam stitch there and a seam stitch, because when you sew it together they disappear, what you should find is you've still got Cobnut and then 3 stitches. If you imagine that bit joining that bit, it's going to be seamless. Right, and if you are working in the round, which is really seamless, then you don't need any additional stitches. Okay, that looks odd. There we are, that's why, that'll be why. another stitch was needed there, so multiple of 4 end of, okay, because when you're knitting in the round it's always facing you, you never come back on yourself, okay. So you do your 3 stitches, cobnut, yeah, and then when you get to here you're actually back at the start of the round because you've worked in the round. Okay, so hope that makes that clear for you and it's useful to know. Another thing to consider with Cobnut Stitch is how does that affect your gauge or your tension? And what I found was essentially it made the tension slightly looser. So on 4mm and double knitting, I would usually get 22 stitches for 4 inches or 10 centimetres, and I actually got 21. And I think that's because we've got our little cobnuts or hazelnuts kind of spreading things out a bit, okay, although it all comes back down to the main reverse stocking stitch here, that kind of pulls it in again. Overall I think it just pulls it out just that bit, but that could be significant. And the other thing I found was it actually shortened things slightly. So instead of having, for example, maybe 30 rows per 10 centimetres or 4 inches, I found I actually got about 32 in this instant. And that was on double knitting and 4mm needles. Okay, but so I would advise you have to swatch because that's going to vary depending on what needles you're using, how your tension works out, and what yarn you're using and how that behaves. But certainly after blocking, that's what I found. That's going to have a bearing on how you integrate this into your knits. So we'll get to some creative ideas now. So now we understand how this stitch behaves and how to work it, you might want to get a bit more creative with it now. So how can you have a play with this? And it might be fun to do a few different swatches. Well, if you can kind of scale it up or scale it down by using larger, thicker yarns, heavier weight yarns. Like this is going to look very different in a chunky or a super chunky compared to double knitting. Equally, you could see how that works out on a finer gauge, like a lighter yarn such as 4-ply or fingering as you call it in the States. Yeah, so that's one way you could play around with this. You could have fun with actually the spacings. What would happen if you put some additional reverse stocking stitch rows in between the rows of cobnuts? And also, what would happen if you added the intervals? You'd need to do that in odd numbers to keep the pattern. So you could have 5 stitches in between each cobnut, can't say that. 5 stitches in between each cobnut instead, couldn't you? What else could you have a play with? How else could you play around with this particular stitch to get a different effect, do you think? I suppose you could make the cobnuts a bit bigger, and we're kind of getting more onto more like bobbles, aren't we then? But the difference between the cobnut and a bobble, say, is that bobbles are generally, although you do several rows backwards and forwards, it's kind of worked on the same row as you're working across, whereas this has a few kind of straight rows as we go up. So I don't know, you could play around with that. What would larger bobbles look like? Anyway, that's a few thoughts. Let me know in the comments if you've got any other ideas or thoughts. Do share. So have a think also, what ifs around how you might apply the stitch. If you're feeling creative, you might want to add a bit of cobnut to an existing pattern, or you might want to design your own garment or item from scratch. The important thing to remember is that issue about it affects the tension. So you would need to adjust the stitch numbers to accommodate that before you start the cobnut stitch and after you've finished that. So with that in mind, what could we do? What could we do? We could, and I'm just sketching these out like this. It's not going to be fancy, it's quick ideas. Okay, you could add a central panel of, would that, what would we think to that? We could add a central panel, couldn't we? Sorry about my lovely drawing, but it's just to give you an idea. You could use it as a sort of band, couldn't you, at a band or a border at any point, either, you know, a hem or as a sort of part way through or on sleeves or whatever. And that band could just be a single row of cobnuts with something textured, couldn't it? Or it could be, you really need, I think, to stick to one row of cobnuts like that, or do 3 rows because of the staggered pattern to give it balance. But it all depends what you're using it for. So that, you know, that's kind of how that would look. You could use it to make, obviously, accessories. You could use it as a scarf, because I think the reverse is not unattractive. It's not the same, so it's not a reversible fabric, but it's not unattractive. So you could, I don't know, have some border and then have of a rib or whatever you would like, and then have your cobnuts there. That might work. You could also use it on a cuff. That might be nice, isn't it? Especially, I think, kind of dramatic cuffs are kind of going to be more in the autumn winter. So, you know, you could have a dramatic cuff that has nice thick cobnut. And yeah, could you put it as a kind of insert on a sleeve? I don't know. So there's just a few thoughts to how you might use it. And yeah, do chip in to how you think you might use this. So there we are. That's our stitch expedition into Cobnut Stitch. I hope that's been helpful to you. If it has, then do give us a like. Always appreciate that. If you have any questions about that, do drop us a comment below. If you haven't knitted Cobnut Stitch before, then I'd suggest do a little swatch like I showed you. So you can cast on 23 stitches and just follow along the video again. But if you fancy working a project, then my lichen mitts or cowl, or both, aren't a bad place to start, and I'll link the pattern below for that as well. If you would like me to cover a different type of stitch in this sort of way, then do suggest those below, and I'll see what I can do for future videos. And speaking of future videos, we've touched on using the yarn over in this stitch. If you wanted to know more about yarn overs, then try this video next. With that, thanks for watching, take care, happy creating, and I hope to see you again soon.